suspects are being. One case involves the FBI is now offering $100,000 to see if the police are releasing.
Welcome to Myths and Mysteries, a true crime and paranormal podcast. This week, I'm covering an unsolved homicide from Keddie, California. First, I want to tell you about a crime that came to my attention while watching the American Wife Swap TV show. In 2018, one of the families to join the show was named the Stockdales. The Stockdales appeared on the show as being devoutly religious. They banned TV, video games, curse words, and dating if they'd had no plans to marry the girl. The family consisted of all sons who would play in a bluegrass group. Years after the show, on June 15, 2017, in Beach City, Ohio, when one of the sons, Jacob Stockdale, was 26 years old, he shot and killed his 21-year-old brother, James William Stockdale, and his 54-year-old mother, Catherine Barbara Stockdale. He then called 911 and hung up the phone. Police responded to this call, but when approaching the home, they heard one single gunshot come from inside the home. They rushed inside to see Jacob bleeding from a wound in his head on the floor. He was alive, but Jacob attempted to complete suicide by shooting himself in the head. He survived, but suffered from brain damage from the attempt. Charged with both murders and pled not guilty by reason of insanity, but earlier this year was found guilty in the court of law and sentenced to 30 years in prison. Glenna Susan Davis was born March 29, 1945, in Springfield, Massachusetts. Glenna went by the name Sue, and unfortunately not much can be found about her life before 1965, when she met her husband James Sharp at the age of 20, changing her name to Susan Sharp, or is better known as Sue Sharp. Sue and James had their first child on November 16, 1965, named Johnny Stephen Sharp. About a year later, in 1966, Sheila Sharp, Sue and James' first daughter was born. On July 22, 1968, their second daughter, Tina Louise Sharp, was born. Then they had two more sons named Rick Sharp, born in 1971, and Greg Sharp, born in 1976. In 1979, just 2 years after their last child was born, Sue and their 5 children, with the help of Sue's brother Don Davis, moved from the Carolina States to California after James and Sue's separation when he became abusive. Sue and the children lived in a trailer on Don's property in Keddie, California, while she got back on her feet after the separation. Sue didn't make a whole lot of money. She received $250 from the Navy since James was a veteran, a check from a federal education program Sue got for taking classes at the local community college, and food stamps from the state. With her income, it was hard to find housing, especially for a family of 6. But when Sue found out about a low-income housing in the town of Keddie, California, it gave Sue hope for her family. Keddie, California is a small town in Plumas County, Northern California. It is near Redding, California in the Sierra Nevada mountains, with a current population of 66 people. During the 1970s, when a recession hit, the town railroads closed down and the population of the town got smaller. There's only one road to access Keddie, but Keddie tried to rebrand itself as a tourist location. The only tourist thing in the town was a set of cabins to rent called the Keddie Resort Cabins, but with no tourism, these turned into low-income housing that Sue found to call home for her and her 5 children. Sue and the children moved into cabin 28 in fall of 1980. The cabin was 2-bedroom and 1 bath with a basement that had its own separate entrance. The cabin opened up to the living room and the kitchen. Then there's 2 bedrooms in the back. Sue, Sheila, and Tina all shared one room. Rick and Greg shared another, and Johnny's room was the basement with a separate entrance, being the oldest child. Life seemed like it was getting better for them. Sue got a part-time job at a lodge called Quincy Elk Lodge. She was doing great in school. Other students at the community college described her as being a good student. Although she preferred to study by herself, she got good grades and hoped to start her own business after she graduated to make money for her kids. In the community at Keddie, they seemed unsure of Sue, especially as a single mom who would go on dates with men. People spread rumors about her, but she didn't let it bother her. She made friends with one of the neighbors named Marilyn Smart, and her children seemed to be doing well. All 5 children went to school in Quincy and started to make friends, not only at school, but with their neighbors at the cabins around them. Johnny, who was 15 at the time of the move, is described as being very independent and outgoing. Sheila, who was 14, was described as being mature and very down-to-earth. Tina, who was 12, looked up to her big sister Sheila and was very, very trusting. Rick, who was 10, was said to be much like his mom. He was shy and very quiet. Greg, at 5 years old, was very energetic, high-spirited, and independent, much like his big brother Johnny. Sheila and Tina made friends with their neighbors in Cabin 26, Melissa and Paula Siebold. Sheila was actually best friends with Melissa Siebold and often spent the night or just spent time at the Siebold's cabin. One night that Sheila spent the night at the Siebold's cabin was April 11th, 1981. That day was a very normal Saturday for the family. They were in and out of their cabin. Earlier in the day, Johnny was hanging out with his friend Dana Hall Wingate in Quincy, while around 12 p.m., the younger boys, Rick and Greg, had a neighbor boy over named Justin Eason over for the night. Around 1:30 p.m., Sue and Sheila left to go pick up Johnny and Dana from Quincy, but Johnny and Dana left again at about 3:30 p.m. to go to a party, which Sue's rule was that they did not hitchhike to the party. Sue hung out with Tina and Sheila for most of the day, till later in the afternoon when they went to the Siebold's house to watch TV, where Sheila spent the night, but Tina went back home to Cabin 28 around 9:30 p.m. when Sheila sent her home. There isn't really a record of when Johnny got home with Dana, but people did see them trying to get a ride home around 9:30 p.m. that night. Everyone sleeping at Cabin 28 by the end of Saturday night was Sue, Tina, Johnny, Dana, Johnny's friend, Greg, Rick, and Justin, the neighbor boy. On April 12, 1981, after sleeping over at the Siebold's cabin, just one cabin over, a 14-year-old, Sheila Sharp, woke up at 7 a.m. and ended up heading back home at 7:45 a.m. She walked into her home that morning to see blood all over. Sheila, upset from what she saw, started to call for her mother, asking where her siblings were. She dropped her bag she had with her and ran back to the Siebold's cabin to get help from James and Zana Siebold, Melissa's parents. James and Sana went to the closest lodge with a phone to call 911 for help, while they sent their son Jamie over to Cabin 28 to check out the cabin and fear that someone may still be in there. Jamie first went to the windows of the cabin to look into them to make sure no one was in the home, and when it looked clear, he went into the cabin to check for any survivors of the attack. This is when he found 3 victims: 36-year-old Sue Sharp, 15-year-old Johnny Sharp, and 17-year-old Dana Wingate. After seeing that the 3 victims were not alive, he was very careful to not disturb the crime scene and to exit the cabin without contaminating anything. When he got outside, he went to go search for more survivors. He did this by looking into the windows he hadn't looked in before. When he noticed that 3 young boys, Rick, Greg, and Justin, were still peacefully sleeping in the boys' room, Jamie pushed open the window and let himself into the room where the boys were sleeping to wake them up. He then helped the 3 boys out of the window of the room to prevent them from seeing what had happened in the living room and to prevent further contamination of the crime scene. An hour after Sheila's discovery, the police arrived on scene with Don Davis, Sue's brother. The police needed Don to confirm the identity of the victims. He did go into the cabin to confirm the victims, but he had to leave multiple times due to the blood and the nature of the attack, but was able to identify all 3 as Sue, Johnny, and Dana. All 3 victims had been bound with electrical tape on their feet and hands. Sue had also been gagged with her own underwear, a bandana, and tape held the gags in place. She was naked from the waist down, but there was no signs of sexual assault found on Sue's body. Sue and Johnny's throats both were cut and had blunt force trauma to their heads, but Sue had been stabbed in the chest and covered with a yellow blanket. Dana had blunt force trauma to the head, like Sue and Johnny, but had been strangled and set. With any attack like the one that killed Sue, Johnny, and Dana, the killer is bound to leave evidence. Blood was found on the victims, ceilings, walls, both bedroom doors, including the doorknobs of Rick and Greg's room, and the railing of the outside stairs, but none belonged to the killers. Even though it's believed Sue did fight the killers due to defensive wounds found on her body. They did find a fingerprint on the rail of the stairs and DNA on a piece of tape not from the victims. Weapons were also in the cabin, including 2 bloody knives, one that was from Sue's own kitchen, and a bloody hammer, and broken pieces of a BB gun that was used to hit Sue in the head. One big discovery during the investigation came hours after the police initially even got into the cabin. Tina Sharp was nowhere to be found. If you remember, Tina was sent back home that night, but she wasn't in the room with the boys or with the 3 victims. There were also small bloodstains on her headboard and bed sheets. The FBI was called in and put out a 5-mile radius for Tina, but even with police dogs, FBI, and police on the search for Tina, she was nowhere to be found. Out of all of the people around during the attacks on Sue, Johnny, and Dana, and the abduction of Tina, only 2 people heard what was happening. The boys who were in the home never heard anything, or even the Seawolves who lived 15 feet away. But a neighbor could hear muffled screaming around 1 or 2 a.m. These neighbors never called the police or thought anything of it because they didn't hear anything else. With further investigation of the murders and kidnapping, the police found that the hammer found on scene was not the only hammer used. The pieces of the BB gun matched a Daisy 880 BB gun. Despite all the evidence found on scene, no suspects were found till a month later when Justin, the neighbor boy who was spending the night that night, told the therapist that he had been having nightmares about Sue being murdered and Tina being taken. During these dreams, Sue would be bleeding and he would try to stop the bleeding with towels, but eventually moved to a blanket when she bled through all of her towels. When police heard about Justin's dream, they made the very unpopular decision to put him under hypnosis. This decision was unpopular because people felt it was unreliable and that if he couldn't remember witnessing a murder, it was for the better. The police still moved forward and placed him under hypnosis. Under hypnosis, he told the story of what he remembered happening that night. He was watching TV with Rick and Greg in their room before falling asleep. He began hearing noises out of the living room and claimed to have seen Sue with 2 men. One of them tall with blonde hair and a mustache, while the other was shorter, dark-haired, and clean-shaven. Both of these men wore sunglasses. Johnny and Dana came home while Sue was talking to these men. Somehow this erupted into violence between them, which resulted in the murders. Shortly after, Tina came out of the room, and one of the men carried Tina out of the back door of the cabin. Although many people felt the story could have been made up based on what he read or heard in the media about what happened in Cabin 28, one very interesting piece of the story is that one of the men he described as a killer matched his stepfather, Martin Smart, or better known as Marty. He was married to Marilyn Smart, Justin's mom. Marty was abusive towards his family, and Marilyn would confide in Sue about problems the two had. Marty, according to the neighbors, openly disliked Johnny because he felt Johnny was a troublemaker. Marty had one particular incident where he tried to run Justin and Marilyn, his stepson and his wife, over in his car, and it landed Marty in a nearby VA hospital to be treated for symptoms he was having related to his post-traumatic stress disorder. While being treated in the hospital, he met a man named John Barbido. They called him Bo. They became such good friends that when Marty got out of the hospital, Bo moved in to Cabin 28 with Marty, Marilyn, and Justin, only 2 cabins away from Sue and her children. On the night of the murders and the kidnapping, Bo and Marty went to a local bar with Marilyn. They returned home later that night, but the men went back to the bar without Marilyn, wearing full suits. The police brought Marty and Bo in for questioning about the murders and the kidnapping of Tina, but the police questioned the men together, and the detectives on the case weren't even the ones to question the men. the county sheriff Doug Thomas allowed officers from the organized crime unit of the Department of Justice to question them. These officers worked organized crime, such as mobs and not homicides. So it's seen as a weird choice of officers to question these men about an active homicide and kidnapping case. During the questioning, Marty explained a hammer with a blue handle of his was missing, and told police that his stepson Justin may have seen something that night without the killer noticing. Police said that Marty seemed to tell way too much information and seemed almost that he was trying to throw them off. Bo, during the questioning, told police that he had been a police officer in Chicago, but after an injury in an armed robbery the injury left him disabled and out of a job. There were rumors that he liked Sue and asked her out multiple times, but told police because of his injury, he knew Sue would never go for him and made him have no interest in her. He also told police that Marilyn was his niece and told them that the time he had been in Keddie was longer than it actually was. None of these things were even true, though police at the time didn't check and cleared them as suspects. Bo was actually tied to the mafia and organized crime in Chicago with a long record of arrest. It had been found that Doug Thomas, the county sheriff, was actually pretty close friends with Marty Smart. A little while after being cleared as suspects, Marty Smart moved to Oregon, where he passed away from cancer in 2000, and Bo moved back to Chicago, where he passed away in 1988. Two developments that happened in the case involving Bo and Marty was that Marilyn, years after the murders, turned over a bloody jacket she believed was Tina's that she found in her basement while renovating it. Unfortunately, police never took record of this jacket and lost the report because there is no record of this happening. Marilyn also told the public in a 2008 documentary that Marty had written a confession to her in a note about their marriage saying, "I've paid the price of your love, and now that I've bought it with 4 people's lives, you tell me we are through? Great, what else do you want?" Marilyn confirmed this letter was in his handwriting and it can be found online, but police never admitted this evidence. With Marty and Bo now in different states and cleared as suspects, the whereabouts of Tina Sharp was still unknown, and the killer of Sue, Dana, and Johnny were out free. Police followed leads of drugs possibly being the motive after people spread rumors of Sue using drugs, but this was ruled out after talking to people in Sue's life and her children, and not finding any drugs in the home or on Sue. Other theories were followed, such as the person who possibly dropped off Johnny and Dana killing the victims and kidnapping Tina, a kidnapping of Tina gone wrong, and even killers being after Dana due to stolen LSD from a drug dealer, and the Sharps just being victims of these drug dealers. These theories and leads all fell through. Sheila would often call the police to help keep her family's case open in hopes to bring Tina home, but it wasn't until April 22, 1984, 3 years later, that any new developments were made on the case. A man named Ronald Petrini was collecting recyclable items around 90 miles southwest of Keddie when he stepped on bones. He had stepped on a human skull and mandible. Police searched the area for more bones and found a pair of jeans with missing back pockets, a blue jacket, a blanket, and empty surgical tape dispenser. With the findings of the bones, a man called the police to inform them that these bones belonged to Tina Sharp. But it wasn't until 2 months later that forensics could use the dental records to identify the bones found as 12-year-old Tina Sharp. Sadly, Tina's bones, or the evidence found, could not show who killed her or how she was murdered, but they knew she passed away shortly after being taken from her home. When Sheila heard that Tina was found, she had hopes that they meant she was coming home, but when speaking to police, she quickly realized Tina would not be coming home. Sheila continued to call the police and fight for justice for not only her family, but for Dana. But she had to watch all the leads and theories come and go with no arrest or suspects, seemingly going cold till 2013 when a new county sheriff named Greg Hagwood took the job. Greg Hagwood was a teen when the murders of Sue, Johnny, Dana, and Tina took place. He was even friends with Johnny and started to work hard to help bring them justice. First was to look at the evidence and investigate what they had on file. They had located the anonymous 911 call from the man who called when Tina's bones were found at the bottom of an unopened evidence box. This was sent to agencies for analysis and possible leads, but no new leads have been announced from this recording. In 2016, a man who was using a metal detector around a dried-up pond in Keddie, when he found a hammer, but thinking it was junk, he threw it back in the water. The man later learned about the Cabin 28 murders, and he informed the police of the hammer he found. This hammer matched the description of the one Marty gave during his interrogation, and while recovering the hammer, a hunting knife was found in the area. Sheriff Hagwood believes that someone intentionally threw these in the water, and the items have been sent to a lab for further analysis, but no evidence have been announced from these weapons just yet. In 2018, it was announced that a piece of tape found at the scene had DNA not belonging to the victims. After sending this tape to be tested, it came back a match to a living suspect in the case. No arrests were made or names released, but police have said there's 6 suspects in the Keddie Cabin murders case. 2 of them, Marty and Bo, have passed away, but the others are still alive. And Detective Mike Gamberg has this to say about them. They better batten down the hatches because we're coming. We're continuing with the investigation, and we're doing interviews and have several persons of interest. For now, the Keddie Cabin murders that took the lives of Sue Sharp, Johnny Sharp, Dana Wingate, and Tina Sharp remain unsolved. But we hope that soon an arrest can be made in the case and justice can be brought to not only the victims, but the Sharp family and the Wingate family. The victims have all been laid to rest in California. Sue, Johnny, and Tina rest next to each other, sharing a gravestone. They live on through Sheila, Greg, and Rick, who continue to keep their memory alive. Although not much can be found about Dana, we can hope his family remembers who he was and talks about him often, and that they can find peace soon. As for Cabin 28 in the Keddie Cabin Resort, for many years it attracted paranormal investigators, true crime enthusiasts, and those who wanted to see the cabin. But in 2004, after the whole site had been abandoned, it fell into disrepair and was demolished. Have you heard of Anchor? Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast. When I started Misty Mysteries, I didn't know where to go, and Anchor helped me get Misty Mysteries started without charging me an arm and a leg. Anchor is really my suggestion for anyone looking to start a podcast. It has tools that allow you to record and edit in-app or on the website. Anchor distributes your podcast on all the listening places such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Good Pods, and all your favorite listening places. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place, and best of all, it's totally free, all on Anchor FM and on the Anchor app.
Hello and welcome to the Least Haunted Podcast, a place where science, skepticism, humor, and anthropology meet to discuss all things spooky, haunting, supernatural, and sometimes just the plain stupid. Join me, your host, Cody Franks, and your co-host,
Garth Von Onen, that's me. Hi, everybody.
As we journey all around the realms of the paranormal sciences to look with a critical and skeptical eye at various and sundry topics such as
Spontaneous human combustion,
talking mongooses,
various frozen hominids,
St. Elmo's fire,
and the Mothman,
and also an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation for some reason,
and a couple scripted radio play holiday specials. So join us every other week for a fun and hopefully entertainingly informative dive into all manner of spooky and strange occurrences, people, places, and things.
Nouns.
The
Least Haunted Podcast.
Because the only thing that's haunted is you.
I'd like to thank you for listening to Misty Mysteries. If you like the podcast, please remember to share with friends, family, and on social media. You can follow the podcast on places such as Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook to interact with me. If you want to own your own merch for the podcast, I am so happy to say that the podcast now has its own merch store. And if you don't want to commit to a sweater or a shirt just yet, the store also has mugs and masks, and I hope to add some fun and just regular Misty Mystery stickers soon. You can find the podcast on all your favorite listening places such as Good Pods, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbeans, and so many more. I will see you on Sunday, and I hope you have an amazing day.